So, on Tuesday, we're going to be here for the set where John Roderick told his story. Yeah. So I thought that was great. If I could get the screen down here, we could. I've got a couple of slides. So what I did is I heard John Roderick tell his story about, and in this story he stole an airplane, and specifically stole his father's airplane and tried to take off. Barely managed. Took off, flew around Alaska where they were a little bit, landed. Again, barely sticking the landing, and then never flew again. So I started. It was interesting. The model of airplane that John Roderick stole was a Cessna 172, which is this pretty common kind of light aircraft. And it just so happens that I had done a few calculations relating to the Cessna 172. Because what I did is I investigated for an article I wrote how this Cessna would fly on atmospheres other than Earth's. So, I'd like to present what would have happened to John Roderick had he stolen that plane on the 32 largest solar system bodies and tried to take off. Now, for starters, the problem of actually running an internal combustion engine on other planets is something we have to get out of the way first, because it needs oxygen to run. It needs to burn it with the fuel. So we have to run it off of batteries of certain kind, which would take filling up the fuel tank with lithium-ion batteries and probably last it for about 10 minutes. But as it turns out, it won't be able to run that long anyway. So I just will go planet by planet here. So he steals a plane and is dropped into the atmosphere of Jupiter. What happens is he sinks downward, the plane can't get any lift, descends, and Jupiter doesn't actually have a surface. The atmosphere keeps getting thicker until it smoothly transitions to a liquid. And he would continue to descend further and further, the pressure would pick up, and eventually he would be crushed into some kind of a shapeless mass. Saturn, about the same story. The airplane can keep a slightly higher glide angle, but it still is not able to keep itself up against the force of gravity there. And Roderick is a shapeless mass once again. Uranus. Neptune. Now, Venus is an interesting case because Venus has about the same surface gravity as Earth, but the atmosphere is some 60 or 70 times denser. It's it's also about 500 degrees. I think that's Celsius, but at that point, it doesn't really matter. So he gets into his father's plane. We're not sure what his father was doing there or how he managed to survive on the surface to get into the plane, but we say he gets in, and at 400 degrees, the aluminum frame of the plane does not actually melt, but everything flammable catches fire. On Mars, it is possible to fly on Mars, and down the hall from where I was working at NASA, there was a project. This was at Langley Research Center in Virginia, but there was a project to build a rocket-powered plane that would fly around on Mars. And the problem is that to fly on Mars, because the atmosphere is so thin, you need to be traveling at about 80 or 90% of the speed of sound just to get enough lift to take off. And a Cessna cannot fly at Mach 0.9, it turns out. So even if the Cessna were in the air somehow, it would immediately plummet toward the ground. If John Roderick jumps into the plane on the ground, turns it on, battery-powered engine, propeller spins and spins and spins and spins, there's not enough air to get any traction, the plane does not roll forward, and Roderick dies on the ground. Now, we're through the first half dozen or so of the 32 largest solar system bodies. Now, Ganymede, it's one of the outer moons. It has no atmosphere. So the plane just sits there slowly cooling. Titan is actually the friendliest planet to flight, even friendlier than Earth. The atmosphere is 4 or 5 times thicker than ours, the surface pressure is a little higher than ours, and the gravity is much lower than ours. So one thing that I actually I worked out is, with an atmosphere that thick and with gravity that low, if you got a good hang glider, like a sport glider, and a large, oversized set of swim flippers, by paddling, you could actually keep yourself in the air and fly all over the place on Titan. And I've seen some other your arms and stay aloft in the air there, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, the one catch is that the surface temperature of Titan is a little over 70, which is not Celsius or Fahrenheit, but Kelvin. A Cessna flying around on Titan, by my calculations, would lose heat at a few degrees a minute, so it would probably be the inside of the cabin. So he would probably last maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes, before everything shuts down. Mercury, a plane dropped on Mercury does not fly. Callisto, same story. Io, the sulfur volcanoes, same, no atmosphere. The moon, also no atmosphere. And at this point, John Roderick is wondering, do we have to do all 32? And the answer is yes. Triton dies on the ground. Eris, one of the newly discovered dwarf planets, dies on the ground. Pluto, a dwarf planet. Titania, another of the outer moons, dies on the ground. Rhea, there are a lot of these outer moons, as Roderick is discovering, dies on the ground. Oberon, dies on the ground. Haumea, dies on the ground. They keep discovering new moons. We can expand this further if we want. Iapetus. Snow White, which is actually extremely red. It's one of the most poorly, that's a nickname given to it by the astronomers when they thought it was bright colored, but it turns out to be one of the darker moons in the solar system. Doesn't help, that's on the ground. Pluto's moon dies on the ground. Umbriel dies on the ground. Ariel dies on the ground. This one hasn't been given a name yet, but it doesn't have an atmosphere. Tethys. Sedna, recently discovered dwarf planet out past Pluto. And Ceres was formerly, like Pluto, was once thought to be a planet, but is now considered one of the dwarf planets in the asteroid belt. No atmosphere. And, of course, the Sun, which is the largest of the 32 largest solar system bodies. And I did run through the calculations here. And it turns out that it's not surprising at all The plane is incinerated in under a second, and then it's vaporized, and then that vapor is turned to plasma. And Earth, where we already heard the story, which is that Roderick successfully steals the plane, takes off, lands, grows up, tends the screws, and that is the tale of 32 John Rodericks.